Hi, my name is Jeff Price from Oklahoma Christian University, and welcome to the class History of Gaming and Animation. Today we're going to look at contributions from Nintendo and other games, and as we have in the past, we've looked at the top 10 video game consoles. Earlier we looked at the Atari 2600. We also have the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES, as number one. We're also going to look at the top 10 video games for consoles. Um, so that list, if you want to start a new list, the first one would be The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and we talked a little bit about that. It made the perfect score, the perfect 10. And be sure and put down that it was played on the primarily on the N64. Now, we're going to go through some other games that might have two or three different adaptations, but we're going to really pick one of them that it was made for. In 1985, the Nintendo Entertainment System um, really had a couple of different devices that came with it, or you could get one of them being the Nintendo Zapper. Another one was the ROB, the abbreviation for the Robotic Operating Buddy that you see on the right there. And these were accessories first released for the Famicom and also with the NES, and it communicated with the television with signals received through its eyes. And Rob is becomes a reoccurring character in many games that Nintendo's put out. And there is a whole series called the Robot series, which were games were made for this particular system. Accessory, the Rob. Rob was one of Nintendo's marketing tricks to market to Nintendo Entertainment Systems and retail stores in North America following the North American video game crash of '83. A couple other things that they tried was the game pack, the Zapper gun that you're seeing there on the left, and just things like that. Actually, I'm gonna let you watch a little video of the Zapper here. And the Gyromite is a game that you would play with the Rob, and also kind of some people would call it the Robot Gyro. And it was released in 1985, and it's one of two games. The other one's called Stack Up that you would use with it. So this is things that you could help during the game is turning uh, these little twisted sets. I'll forward a little bit. Super Mario Bros. Is a 1985 platform video game developed by Nintendo, and it was published for the NES as a sequel to the game Mario Brothers. In Super Mario Bros., the player controls Mario, and in a two-player game, the second player controls his brother Luigi as he travels through the Mushroom Kingdom in order to rescue Princess Toadstool from Bowser. The game's theme music by Koji Kondo is recognized worldwide, even by people that haven't even played the game, and it's a representation of video game music when everybody in play sort of references it on TV or anything like that. Um, so one of the things that there is a glitch in the game where you can warp through pipes, and most of you guys have already played Super Mario Brothers, but I'll show you a little video of it. So basically, the game has coins scattered around for Mario to collect, and special bricks marked with the question marks. And when hit from below, Mario can reveal either more coins or a special item, things like that. There are special invisible bricks that you can find that has rare items. If you gain a red or yellow super mushroom, Mario will double his size and can take on on extra hit from most of the enemies and things like that. So the success of this Super Mario caused it to be ported to almost every one of Nintendo's major game consoles. Okay, here's a timeline I wanted to kind of show you from 1985 to 2010. So you have Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers 2, Super Mario Brothers 3, Super Mario World in 92, Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64, Super Mario Sunshine, New Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Galaxy, Super Mario Brothers for the Wii, and Super Mario Galaxy 2. Here is a video of 25th anniversary. These are some of the things in Super Mario Brothers. There was Mario growing there. Mario swimming. And this had a little bit of different style, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Now this is when it truly goes into 3D. So there's also the Super Mario Brothers franchise, and these are, everything from Halloween outfits to, physical pieces. There is
Hey, Donald, it's the Super Mario Brothers Super Show.
cartoons.
With the Mario Brothers and plumbing the game, we're not like the others who get all the fame. If you're thinking trouble, you can call us on the double. We're faster than the others, you'll be hooked on the brothers. Yo, you're in for a treat, so hang on to your seat. Get ready for a mission and remarkable feats. You'll meet Koopas and Troopas, the princess and the others. Hanging with the plumbers, you'll be hooked on the brothers to the bridge.
And that set kind of almost looks like a Warner Brothers cartoon in the background. Like, there also was a movie.
Where are we? I got a feeling we're not in Brooklyn no more. They're brothers. They're plumbers. Hold up.
I always thought this was kind of cool too. I looked up a little bit of fan art and the way that other people might interpret the Super Mario Brothers, and I thought these were kind of cool illustrations. So Doki Doki Panic, which translates to Dream Factory Heart Pounding Panic, is a basically Doki Doki is a Japanese onomatopoeia for a rapidly beating heart, and this is often translated as Dream Factory. Like I said, Heart Pounding Panic. And it's a Japan-only video game developed by Nintendo in cooperation with Fuji Television for the Famicom Disk System. It was later released outside of Japan in an altered format under the name Super Mario Bros. 2, since the original Japanese Super Mario Bros. Sequel, Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, was deemed too difficult for overseas players. Eventually, the altered Mario version of Doki Doki Panic was released in Japan under the title Super Mario USA. So, as we talked earlier, this is sort of one of the looks that was a little bit different than the original game, and so this one, once again was sort of developed. And you can tell with the textures and the outline of the players and Doki Doki Panic. And here is Super Mario Brothers 2. So you'll see a lot of very similar visuals to Doki Doki Panic. So as you can see, there's a lot of similarities. Super Mario Bros. 3 was released in Japan in 1988 and in the United States in 1990-1991. The game centers on the quest of Mario and Luigi to save the rulers of the Seven Kingdoms from Bowser, and the two brothers must travel across 8 worlds to restore order in the Mushroom World. And it has new power-ups, new augmented character abilities, and these are all going to be carried on to future games. Um, Prior to the private consumer North American release, gameplay footage from the Super Mario Bros. 3 appeared in this film. It's called The Wizard, which kind of helped fuel the anticipation about the game being released. And when it was finally released, it's really successful, and it was one of the best-selling games in the whole industry. Um, so based a lot of I'll show you this game, and this and that's Young Fred Savage.
touch of romance.
I am not kissing a boy.
And a ton of trouble.
That's you. Would you wait?
Sorry about that. You maniacs! They'll get there any way they can. Here we come!
It's Jimmy! It's Jimmy!
Come here! Awesome!
Now what do you think you're doing to him? All his life, you would tell him to do what you want him to do. How about once you ask him what he wants to do, huh?
Video Armageddon. He's gonna take a lot of guts.
So that's what people got so excited about.
A little magic. And the wizard. Fred Savage.
So in 1992, there had the release of Super Mario World, and Super Mario Brothers 4 in Japan. And the game centers around the quest of Mario and Luigi to save the dinosaur land from Bowser. And the two brothers must travel across the seven worlds to restore order to Dinosaur Land. And it's built on the gameplay of several Mario Brothers games, and with all the new power-up and abilities. And it is a two-dimensional platform game just like before. And you can control either Mario or Luigi from a third-person perspective. Um, it has very similar gameplay to several of the other ones. But player can flow with the aid of special items and execute kind of new different jumps and a spin jump. Dinosaur using the tongue action. So, on our top 10 video games for the consoles, Super Mario Brothers for the NES is number one. Metroid is an action-adventure game and is the first entry into the Metroid series. It was co-developed by Nintendo's Research and Development One Division and Intelligent Systems, and was released in 1986 and in Japan, and then 1987 in the U.S. Set on the planet of Zebes, the story follows Samus Aran, and the interesting is it's a female hero, and um, so she basically attempts to retrieve Metroid creatures that were stolen by space pirates who plan to replicate the Metroids by exposing them to beta rays and then use them as biological weapons to destroy Samus and all who oppose them. So the game style, focusing on exploration and the search for power-ups that are used to reach previously inaccessible areas, influenced a lot of other games. Its varied endings for fast completion times made it a popular game for speed running, and Metroid was lauded as being one of the first video games to feature a female protagonist. And you didn't really know that, was sort of a surprise, which was cool. I'm gonna fast forward just a little bit so you can kind of get an idea of the gameplay. Metroid Other M is an action-adventure video game for the Wii developed by Project M, a team which consists of staff members from Nintendo, Team Ninja, and D-Rockets. A part of the Metroid series, it features gameplay at first and third-person perspectives, and is the first installment of the franchise to feature melee attacks, which could only be executed when the enemy's health was reduced to a certain degree. So you can see it has a sort of similar gameplay as the original, but much more interesting. There's also been a little bit of a talk of a Metroid movie. So here's some Metroid releases: Metroid 1986, Metroid 2, Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, Prime, Zero Mission, Prime 2, Prime Pinball, Prime Hunters, Metro Prime 3 Corruption, Metroid Prime Trilogy, and then, as I just showed you, Metro Other M. And some of the looks of each of those. In terms of franchises, here are some examples of some of the Metroid. Here's a Lego set, some fan art, and cosplay. So on our study guide, Gyromite is a video game released in 1985 for the NES, designed for use with the Robotic Operating System, or ROB. Many people credit 1985 Super Mario Bros. As the game's most influential for the NES success due to the franchise it created. And a surprise reveal at the conclusion of the famous 1986 NES game Metroid, Samus Aran is one of the first empowered female video game characters who is not controversial due to, over-sexualized design. She was tough. Castlevania, also known as Devil's Castle Dracula, is a console video game developed and published by Konami for the Famicom in 1986. The player takes control of Simon Belmont in the year 1691, who must defeat the vampire Dracula. A sequel, Simon's Quest, was released for the NES a couple of years later. So it's kind of the typical platform game in the 8-bit era. You got 6 levels, which are you have to play in strict linear progression. So you got the jumping just like several of the other games before. There's a lot of stairs located, and you have attack by way of a whip, and you can get special items throughout the game. There's actually 6 levels that conclude with a boss fight, and these bosses are generally taken from horror legends such as a giant bat, Medusa, a pair of mummies, Frankenstein monster, and Igor, the Grim Reaper, which is very difficult, and then finally the big boss, which is Dracula. I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. Okay, so Castlevania was quite the franchise, and you can kind of see that you have Castlevania Vampire Killer, which was an open-ended form of gameplay. You had Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, which was non-linear gameplay, the world map, and the player basically was free to explore and revisit anywhere. You could purchase supplies, weapons. There's, you know, they're also introduced a persistent world with its own day-night cycle and affected when certain thing certain things would happen at certain locations, and it would offer multiple endings depending on what time it took to complete the game. Just Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. It had alternate branching paths with different stage and alternate endings depending on the player's choice as well as multiple player characters. I mean, Castlevania Symphony of the Night was a side-scrolling game. It also used RPG elements and collectible weapons, armor, and hidden orbs. And basically, a lot of these other games followed this particular template. There's Castlevania Rondo of Blood, which was anime style, and that's around 1993. And then Castlevania 64 for the Nintendo 64, and Legacy of Darkness, which is the first 3D version in 1999. And basically, the success of Castlevania series has resulted in the Guinness Book of World Records awarding the series the 7 most world records for gamers. It's most games in action adventure series, largest number of platforms for one series, and longest Castlevania title for the release of Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. And you can kind of see in 2000 there's a lot of other these Castlevania games, the arcade and the Rebirth, Harmony of Despair. The Kunio-kun series was a game franchise started by Technos in Japan, and they eventually will make the Double Dragon franchise. And this is the first game in a series which is fully titled Neketsu Koa Kuni-kun, which roughly translates to Hot Blood Tough Guy Kunio. And basically, Neketsu is the name of Kunio High School. So the series originates in the arcades and the Famicom console, and the protagonist, which was Kunio, variously named Alex and Crash Cooney in the United States, were named after the Technos Japan's former president, Kunio Taki. Along with that, it also became the Technos Japan's main mascot, appearing in the company's logo in several games and television commercials. Although the original game was created by Yokishi Kishimoto, who later designed Double Dragon, many of the later games were the handiwork of two men, Mitsuru Yoshimitsu Yoshida and Yoyokuri Miyoko Sekimoto. And I'm probably just totally killing those names. And so here is a little video of the game. So instead of our other games in the same appearance, Renegade, River City Ransom, Super Dodgeball, Crash and the Boys, were all these Kunio-kun style games. I like the picture of the car there in the background. Okay, so Double Dragon is a 1987 beat 'em up developed by Technos once again and distributed in North America by Tato. It is the spiritual and technological successor to the earlier beat 'em up game, the Kunio-kun, which we just saw, but introduced several additions such as two-player quadriv gameplay and the ability to arm oneself with the enemy's weapon after disarming them. And it's considered to be one of the first successful examples of the genre, resulting in the creation of 2 arcade sequels and several spin-offs, as well as inspiring other companies to create several beat-em-up games themselves. The player takes control of martial artist Billy Lee, or his twin brother Jimmy, also known as Hammer and Spike in the supplementary materials for the American arcade release, as they fight their way into the turf of Black Warriors gang in order to rescue their common love interest, Marion. The player character also has a repertoire of martial art techniques which they can perform by using a joystick and 3 action buttons: kick, jump, and punch, individually or both in combination. Techniques range from basic punches and kicks to more elaborate maneuvers like hair grabbing moves or elbow punches. When playing another player, one can assist the other by grabbing their partner's opponent from behind. The player begins the game with a certain number of extra lives, and the life gauge which depletes as the player takes hits from enemies. If the life gauge runs out or the time limit is reached, the player will lose a life. And certain enemies will carry a melee weapon which the player can use by disarming the enemy carrying it and retrieving it from the floor. The available weapons include steel bats, whips, throwing knives, and dynamite sticks, as well as large objects such as boxes, oil drums, and rocks, which the player can lift and throw at enemies or kick towards the upcoming one. And here's a video of Double Dragon. Those are the bad guys taking Marion. I'll fast forward a little bit. There we go. Ah, there was a knee to the head. Oh, here's the box. being thrown. There was dynamite. Oh, I forgot to show you. They also had a cartoon later based on Double Dragon.
Jimmy and Billy Lee are Dragon Masters now. Years ago, I said you would be Dragon Master. Well, fulfill that destiny, Billy. And just in time, for I will be leaving you soon. Do not battle if you can avoid it. If you must fight, do not injure. Never intentionally harm another. Press the sword to your forehead. Feel its power. Ahead lies your greatest test. The power of the shadow. Remember, good and evil are as close as the other side of the mirror. As you command, oldest dragon, I will fight for right. You, Billy Lee, are Dragon Master now.
Okay, Aussie Rules Footy is the first AFL simulation video game for the NES. It was developed by Melbourne-based Beam Software, who we're going to hear a lot about later. They're going to create games such as Lord of the Rings and things like that. And it basically involves playing a game of Australian rules football from a third-person perspective with the ability to perform the basic actions of a typical Australian rules football player. The game can be played by one person playing against a computer team or two players playing against each other. There is also a kick-to-kick mode, a season mode where 1, 4, or 6 players can play multiple games in a season, finishing with a grand final. So the objective of the game is for the player's team to have the highest score at the end of the game, and you can score by kicking either a goal, 6 points, or a behind 1 point to move the football. A player with the ball can either kick or handball the ball, and a player without the ball can either mark the ball or tackle the opposition with the ball. And here is a little video of the game. So this is basically the gameplay of kick to kick, but I mean there's several other kind of, you can play entire match and stuff like that. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. You can pick different teams and have different colors. Okay, so in 1990, this was developed for the NES, and it's the same game that we saw earlier in the arcade Narc that was so controversial, and everybody said that it was very violent, even though you're playing the idea of a cop, uh, you know, basically busting pimps and drug dealers and stuff like that. Um, you know, so what happened when it came to the NES? Nintendo forced all the drug references to be removed from the actual gameplay, and despite the Nintendo Entertainment System's limitations, the game retained most of the violence and the gore. The gameplay was significantly handicapped because the NES controller only had 2 buttons, whereas the arcade version had 4 buttons. So not as bloody and violent as the one that we saw, earlier in the arcade, where it was blood was splattering and all that. Now this is a game. Japan Bashing is a game from System Soft, and the game is played on a screen with images of fictional leaders of the United States and Japan. The player is always American, pitting himself against a computer which plays as a part of the Tokyo government. As the game begins, the player chooses the degree and type of bashing from a selection on the screen, such as the Japanese government should stop driving whales into extinction. Japanese should make wheat their staple food and not whales. Or people who can't speak English are barbarians. The more one bashes, the more computer yields on trade demands, responding in the round about language typical of Japanese politicians. We should concede on the issue in order not to leave tensions between the two nations. At the same time, however, the anti-American sentiment rises, jeopardizing overall relations. For advanced players, the range of possible outcomes include a complete Japanese buyout of America and even war. To show the player how well he's doing, the computer graphic shows a cowboy firing bullets at the samurai who flicks them away with his sword, indicating Japan is not giving in to the U.S. demands. If Japan concedes, the samurai gives up and falls over dead, or in most extreme cases commits hara-kiri. So this is basically, and this is, here's the cowboy shooting at the samurai, and this is a Japanese game, so, let's see if I have a video of this. I guess I don't. But, this is, and here's a blow up of that. This Japanese bashing is a Japanese game, and they're saying, the Americans this is how they deal with us, is they sort of always bash us. And this is in 1992. In Britain, for the Spectrum, there wasn't a lot of great games about fruit. So this one was basically, it's you play this game and it's almost like a casino game, and you can win virtual money. It's a simulator, but it really starts to show. And this is going to be a game that we're going to see a lot of casino games come up during this time period from '88 to 2000s. And you see how big it is online now for casino games and all that. And this is really one of the first ones. It's called Fruit Machine Simulator. Grand Prix Simulator is a game from Codemasters, and Codemasters we're going to look and see something that they're going to do to actually crack the save games and all that, and crack open some of these games for Nintendo. But this is one of their first games, and this was actually for the Spectrum, and it was a racing game developed by the Oliver twins and published by Codemasters for the ZX Spectrum, the British computer, and the Amstrad CPC and the Commodore 64 computer system. And it was released in 1988. And so basically the game was designed so the player is looking down the track, as you see on the right there, from an overhead view. And basically, similar to games such as Badlands, Super Off-Road, the Atari Racing 8, and all that kind of stuff. The player controls a car on the track, and the computer controls the other. Each race is 3 laps around the track, and if you basically win, you get to go to a new track. and earn different points. And there's oil spots and things like that that you can make your car spin. And it's a pretty interesting game. But really, what we're getting at is going to be the Codemasters as a developer. Uh, they're going to also create this game in '88 called Dizzy, and it's an adventure arcade game starring this anthropomorphic egg. And this was sort of the British's version of Mario, or what they were trying to create something cute and that people would pick up on. Um, and it really became one of the most successful European computer brands in the 80s, never really breaking into the United States as much. Um, so this was a egg-like creature named Dizzy, and you want to save your friends and the family of the Yoke folk from the schemes of his arch nemesis, the evil wizard Zax. So it's sort of a shoot. I guess I don't have a video for it, but they were platform games, and they emphasized puzzle solving, and you kind of run around various fairy tale locations, collecting objects, interacting with other characters, and solving puzzles. So rather than jumping like conventional platform games, Dizzy would somersault and roll around the landscape, hence the name Dizzy. So it had a couple of spin-off games too: Fast Food Dizzy, Quick Snacks, and Dizzy Down the Rapids. So basically, Codemasters really, this is called the Game Genie, and it was a series of cheat systems designed by them and sold by Camerica and Galoob for the Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo and Game Boy, Mega Drive Genesis, Sega Game Gear, and it basically modified the game data, allowing the player to cheat, manipulate various aspects of the game, and sometimes view unused contents and functions that were never intended to be seen. So it is known as the first example of consumer-friendly game enhancement by means of temporarily directly altering the binary code of the game. Although there are currently no Game Genie products on the market, over 5 million units were sold worldwide, and the most video game console emulators featured Game Genie support. So emulators that have Game Genie support also allowed a near unlimited number of codes to be entered, whereas the actual products have much smaller limits that would top around 3 and 6 codes. There was the Action Replay, the Code Breaker, as you see on the screen, and the Game Shark, or all these different similar hacking devices that would hack through the consoles. Here is the Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy by Codemasters in '91. So they decided to release games on the NES without Nintendo's approval. And this was the very first one. So the evil wizard Zax casts a spell on the Yoke folk and kidnaps Dizzy's girlfriend Daisy. So you got to go rescue her. They didn't do very well in the United States, but as you can see at the bottom of the cover, it says the UK's #1 video game hero. So if you want fun, you can look up Adventures of Dizzy and play this online. So in our study guide, Taito's 87 Double Dragon is considered to be one of the first successful examples of the beat-em-up genre. System Soft's 1992 Japan Bashing was a game wanting to counter growing U.S. criticism of Japan's trade policies based on racism and xenophobia. Xenophobia is basically having a problem with an entire group of people. And Codemasters 1991, The Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy, was one of the first non-licensed NES games. Wheel of Fortune is an American television game show created by Merv Griffin that premiered in 1975 and then started syndicating in '83. And basically it's been adapted to a lot of different video games, and basically most of them based on the TV show, as you can probably imagine. And then the modern versions of the Wheel of Fortune games feature Vanna White, who becomes the co-host and on TV, and Pat Sajak since about 2010. Um, and from about 1998 to 2010, even the show's announcer, Charlie O'Donnell, participated, and then eventually he passed away. So here is Wheel of Fortune by Game Tech for the NES. You can kind of see it carries the official Nintendo seal of quality. So if you've ever watched Wheel of Fortune, you can know they spin the wheel. When it lands, you can guess and try to guess the phrases on the screen. So you pick what you want. You try to spin the valve and solve this. There is an online version of this now where you can actually play against other people and all that. Not from the same company, but just on the internet. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is an action-adventure video game created for the NES by Rare and published by LJN Toys in 1989. And the single-player game is based loosely on the film of the same name, and it had combined elements of a graphic adventure computer games with some of the more traditional action-adventure gameplay that we kind of had seen before. And so the game takes place in Los Angeles in 1947, and you take control of Eddie Valiant, which with the framed Roger Rabbit cartoon character always following Valiant. The player wanders around the urban city of Hollywood, entering various buildings and caves in order to speak with people, some of whom are in the film, and picks up various items to try to see who framed Roger Rabbit. The second half of the game takes place in the infamous Toontown with more buildings and caves to explore, and it's. If you've ever seen the movie, this was for the Nintendo Entertainment System and based on the movie. So once again, this is a tie-in to movies. There's Roger following the detective. RC Pro-Am from Rare is developed in '88, and this is a game developed in the United Kingdom, and it was released for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and it basically presented an overhead isometric perspective of a single player racing a radio-controlled car around a series of tracks. The object of each track is to qualify for the next race by finishing in the top three. And you can collect improved performance, and there's hazards like rain puddles and oil slicks. This is also one of the first games to feature vehicular combat, which they can use missiles and bombs to disable opposing vehicles. And it was later ported to the Sega Genesis and remade several other times. And the cool thing about this is that you're playing a radio-controlled car, and it's an isometric perspective, which was a little bit different for the time. There was 24 tracks total, and once again you wanted to qualify, and there was trophies and all that. So that was qualifying, and then here's our actual race. Battletoads is another game from Rare, and it's a platformer video game created by Tim and Chris Stamper and developed by Rare. You star as 3 anthropomorphic toads named after the skin conditions rash, zits, and pimple. And the game was really made to rival Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games that were out at the same time. And it's arguably one of the most graphically advanced video games ever released for the NES, at a time when the video game market was turning to the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo entertainment systems. The game became famous for extreme difficulty and humorous ways to beating enemies, as during finishing attacks, the character's body parts transform into gigantic, exaggerated appendages for devastating attacks and kind of creating that comic effects. So different levels of the game has very different play styles. There are a few 3D and a traditional 2D beat 'em up levels when the player progresses by defeating enemies, even though these levels tend to have many lethal obstacles. The most lethal, the most difficult levels of the obstacle course and the race levels, where a character must dodge a series of obstacles while driving or flying at high speed to outrun the enemy that can constantly kill the player. So, after her defeat by the Galactic Corporation at the Battle of Canis Major, the evil Dark Queen and her renegade space troops retreat to the outer reaches of the universe, hiding out in dark spaces between the stars. Meanwhile, on board the spaceship Vulture, Professor T-Bird and a trio of Battletoads, Rash, Zit, and Pimple, are escorting Princess Angelica back to her home planet, where the father, the Terran Emperor, awaits for her safe arrival. Along the way, Pimple, the biggest Battletoad, takes Angelica out for a cruise in the Toadster to a nearby leisure station. However, the Dark Queen ambushes them before they can get there, and they are kidnapped and carried away to Ragnarok's world, the Dark Queen's planet. So the Professor Bird then sends the remaining Battletoads down to save Pimple and Angelica, knowing it will be a hard battle against the planet's dangerous environments, traps, and enemy forces. They have to go a long way to the planet's rough surface in deep caves on the land of Gargantuan, and ultimately to the Tower of Shadows, where the Dark Queen herself waits. And this is her. I'm going to fast forward to a little bit of gameplay. So if you can kind of see, there's a lot of the exaggeration of the punching movements and so you can kind of see there's a lot of different styles of play in here. So that's Battletoads. The Atari 7800 Pro System, or simply the Atari 7800, is a video game console released by Atari in 1986. And the original release had occurred 2 years earlier under Atari Inc., but and it had been originally designed to replace the Atari 5200, but it was temporarily shelved due to the sale of the company after the video game crash. But again, it was released, and it would compete with the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Master System. It had simple digital joysticks, and it was almost fully backward compatible with all the 2600 games. And it sold for the price of $140. The Atari 7800 remained officially active between 86 and 91. And it, so basically, it said that by that time that it was going to create the Atari XE game system, and so the 7800 would cease. So despite the trailing Nintendo Entertainment System in terms of number of units sold, the 7800 was a profitable enterprise for Atari, benefiting largely from Atari's name and the system's 2600 compatibility. And nonetheless, it failed to help Atari gain dominance again over Nintendo, even though that it did do well, but just didn't do well enough. So, the problem is it had a delayed release, peripherals that were canceled, and really lack of financial backing based on the new owners of Atari. Ball Blazer was one of the games that was created by a new game company called Lucasfilm, who had made, Lucas, the film company, started making games, and this was they made for the 7800. Later, it's going to become LucasArts Entertainment, and it's basically a simple one-on-one sports style game bearing similarities to basketball and soccer. Each side is represented by a craft called a rotofoil, which can be controlled by either a human player or a computer-controlled droid with 10 levels of difficulty. The game, you can play human versus human, human versus droid, and even droid versus droid matches. The basic objective of the game is to score points by either firing or carrying a floating ball into the opponent's goal. The game takes place on a flat checkerboard playing field, and each player's half of the screen is presented in a first-person perspective. And you can gain possession of the ball by simply running into it, at which point it is held by force field in front of the craft. And the opponent can attempt to knock the ball away from the player using the fire button, and the player is in possession of the ball can also fire the ball towards the goal. Fast forward a little bit. So as you can kind of see, the split screen, you're playing as the character, and then you're trying to hit it through the goal. Xevious for the 7800, and several centuries ago, a population with advanced technology left Earth to escape the Ice Age. In the 21st century, the Xevious people, led by the biocomputer GAMP, return to Earth and tries to conquer, with their enemy taking control of several areas. The player controls the ship Solavu and must defeat the invading Xevious army. And this is the same game that we saw for the arcade, and just playable on the 7800. Joust is an arcade game developed by Williams and released in 1982. It's a platform game that features two-dimensional graphics, and the player uses a button and joystick to control a knight riding a flying ostrich. The object is progress through levels by defeating groups of enemy knights riding buzzards. And I'll play a little bit of that. This is a game I played a lot. And you can kind of see the ostrich the knight is riding on, spray painted on the side of the arcade game. So following the success that they had with Defender, they researched for new creative staff, believing video games are the future of entertainment. A guy named Newcomer left his job as a toy designer to work at the company, who hired him to create game ideas and support the development staff. After a few days at the company, he generated a list of ideas, including the game's ideas for the War of the Worlds, which was a game, and Joust, which was his top two choices. Um, so this guy, John Newcomer, led the development team, which included Bill Futzenreuter, Jan Hendricks, Python Angelo, Tim Murphy, and John Kulturek. And, basically he aimed to create a flying game with cooperative two-player gameplay, but wanted to avoid a space theme, which was popular at the time. The staff worked within technical limitations of the hardware, and which was based on the earlier Defender um, hardware, and then they optimized the visuals, taking it away from being a vector game. So this was a very popular game. As you can kind of see, the buzzards that are flying, and your goal is to basically step in the air with your ostrich and then bop. Actually, I'm sorry, they're on they're on vultures, and then Triceratops should be coming in the scene, and if you hit the enemy higher than they are, they'll produce this egg. If you don't select the egg, it hatches and becomes a much more difficult enemy. They're coming up from those pads. This guy's not hitting anybody. And you can see here at the bottom, if you get too close to the fire, it grabs you and pulls you down into it. Here we go. There's a pterodactyl. I don't know if you just saw that flying by. And that will kill you instantly if it hits you. So as you go through different levels, you'll start to see these things disappear, these platforms. So the egg wave is to try to capture as many eggs as you can before they hatch. So it's sort of a speed round. And they did it pretty easily. So now you have less, and they just got killed. So this is Joust on the 7800, and you can kind of see how it relates. So it's pretty close. Pretty close to the arcade game. There's the speed round. So the Sega SG-1000 1983, which stands for Sega Game 1000, was a cartridge-based video game console manufactured by Sega. And this was really Sega's first entry into the home video game hardware business. And while this system wasn't popular, it provided the basis for more success for Sega Master System, what we're going to see later. And this was released in 1983 to the Japanese market. And coincidentally, this is the exact same day that Nintendo's Family Computer was released in Japan. And it reached minor success in the market, and it sold moderately well in Asia. And basically, game manufacturer Tezuka originally produced the Othello Multivision and SG-1000 clone with its own set of Othello Multivision branded games. Because of the SG-1000's hardware was very similar to Coleco's ColecoVision console, Telegames, who made ColecoVision, also was able to produce a clone named the Telegames Personal Arcade in North America, which could play both SG-1000 and ColecoVision games. And basically, the caveat of the SG-1000 surprisingly wide availability on Taiwan's secondary market. Um, it was it was really everywhere else it kind of did okay. It did great in Taiwan. The Sega Master System is an 8-bit cartridge-based video game and was manufactured by Sega in 1986. And it is the video game console that most almost could, basically. Despite its technical superiority to the dominant NES, the machine lacked just one critical thing. Can you guess what that is? Mario. Without this icon and the emergence of Sonic the Hedgehog still 5 years over the horizon, the Sega Master System ran a far distant second to the NES during the 8-bit generation. And these are some of the game systems that arose after Atari, basically. And it sold in two systems. There was a bare bones one called the Sega Base System, and then there was this one was called the Sega Master System, and it became much more popular. So some of the games for the Sega included this one, Alex Kidd in the Miracle World, and it was released in 1986. And basically, Alex Kidd in the Miracle World is primarily a platform game in which also incorporates strategy and role playing. The player must finish levels and overcome obstacles and scenarios in a 2D atmosphere. Throughout the 11 stages of Alex Kidd, he faces many monsters plus 3 henchmen of Jenkin the Great before facing Jenkin himself. And Alex Kidd is the only playable character in the game. His primary skill is punching, which he can use to attack the enemies, break certain types of rocks to open blocks, and access new areas and collect money. Breaking or stepping on certain blocks releases an evil spirit that will try to kill Alex. Others unlock the ability to jump, and the game requires more than the player's ability to accomplish specific phases. Any money Alex collects can be used to purchase items such as motorbikes and pedicopters, which are small pedal-powered helicopters, and basically at the end of certain levels, Alex must face one of the henchmen in a game of rock, paper, scissors. And it has 17 stages, and at the end of some of the stages, Alex Kidd has to face a big boss, in which he plays once again rock, paper, scissors, or Jankenpon in Japanese. So here is so that's the rock, paper, scissors. So that's Alex Kidd in Miracle World. Okay, Phantasy Star by Sega is the first installment in the Sega's game series of the same name. It was considered one of the pioneers among console role-playing games, both for its advanced graphics technology and really for being one of the first story-driven games released in the West. And it was ported in a decade later as a part of this whole Phantasy Star collection, which was released for the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation 2 and the Game Boy Advance, where it, critics deemed a historically relevant step for the genre. Um, so Phantasy Star introduced the Algol solar system where many of the events in the series would take place. Alice Landale, a young woman, swears revenge on the cruel King Lassic for killing her brother. The game follows her quest to defeat the king, meeting new companions along the way. Although her quest begins only as a means of enacting revenge, she realizes she must save the entire system from the evil being. Okay. So have you noticed there is a lot of references to Star Trek and things look like stormtroopers? I mean, it was definitely during this time period, the 80s. That was the reference that everybody used for this sort of information. Um, the Phantasy Star franchise basically started off with Phantasy Star. Then you had Phantasy Star Adventure, Phantasy Star Collection, Phantasy Star Gaiden, Phantasy Star 2, Phantasy Star 3, Generations of Doom, Phantasy Star 2, Text Adventures, Phantasy Star 4, The End of the Millennium, Phantasy Star Online 2, um, Online Version 2, Episode 1 and 2, Episode 3, Card Revolution, Blue Burst, and now you have this online Phantasy Star universe. So that's quite the franchise. Space Harrier is a third-person rail shooter game released by Sega in 1985. It was produced by Yu Suzuki, responsible for a lot of the Sega games we saw. One like Outrun in the motorcycle one that shifted, and it spawned several sequels: Space Harrier 3D, Space Harrier 2, and the spin-off Planet Harriers. And Space Harrier was one originally made for the arcades and later saw ports to many home video game systems. Its release on the Sega Master System is notable as there were two versions, one that was just like the arcade while the other, entitled Space Harrier 3D, was actually a sequel. It's set in the Fantasy Zone, a surreal world composed of bright colors and a checkerboard-style ground. And the enemies are so unique, featuring prehistoric animals, Chinese dragons, and even alien pods. The player is forced along the level, running and flying around enemy fire while shooting back with fireballs by way of the character's underarm cannon, which also doubles as a rocket device, allowing the character to fly. The character graphics are sprite-based, even though levels are pseudo 3D. It was the first arcade game to use 16-bit graphics and Sega's superscaler technology that allowed pseudo 3D sprite scaling at high frame rates, which gave it the ability to scale as many as 32,000 sprites, which is a lot, and to fill a moving landscape with them, along with over 32,000 color displayed simultaneously on the screen. It was also introduced a true analog flight stick for movement, which ability to register movement in any direction as well as measure the degree of push. So, quite the game for Sega. So this is sort of a Galaga style coming at you. We saw this in G-Lock and some of the other flying games. So, under study guide, its delayed release, its canceled peripherals, and the lack of financial backing from the company's new owners all combined to ensure that the Atari 7800 would never see any success beyond being a cooler way of playing Atari 2600 titles. Sega's Space Harrier was the first arcade game to use 16-bit graphics that allowed pseudo 3D sprite scaling at high frame rates with the ability to scale as many as 32,000 sprites and fill a moving landscape with them.